Welcome to English Lessons with Dr. Vinamrata.
Hello, my dear students. Today we are going to critically appreciate the poetry Zorontian written by T.S. Eliot. As we all know that Eliot's poetry is not very easy to comprehend and is always having many obscure images, biblical references, mythological references, which are deep and probing, and one must have time and a lot of critical faculty to comprehend it. And there are layers and layers of meanings like onion. You have to peel it off layer by layer to find out the intricacies of what Eliot is trying to say. But one thing which is most common is the dilemma of the modern man and the age which is reaching the verge of destruction or is decaying, which becomes the central theme of his major poems, be it the proof rock poetry or the wasteland, or today when we are talking about Zorontian. Zorontian basically means an old man, and here the narrator, the mouthpiece of Eliot, is an old man who narrates the decaying aspects or attributes of this modern contemporary age. So let's begin with the poetry. About the poet Thomas Stearns Eliot, 26th of September 1888 to 4th of January 1965. He was a poet, essayist, publisher, playwright, critic, and editor. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, America, he moved to England in 1914 at the age of 25 and became a British subject in 1927 at the age of 39. His famous poems are The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, The Wasteland, The Hollow Man, Ash Wednesday, Four Quartets. His famous plays are Murder in the Cathedral and The Cocktail Party. We all know that Eliot was awarded the Nobel Prize of Literature. He was a Nobel laureate, and that was awarded to him in 1948, and he was also bestowed with the Order of the Merit. So having said about Eliot and his many poetries, and we all know, be it Wasteland or be it Four Quartets or Proof Rock Song, everywhere he talks about the modern man and its problems. This problem of this modern society, the degenerating society, the decaying society which he represents in his poetries, the modern society which is totally focused on material gains. It is a materialistic society where people are moving away from the moral values, which is the necessity of the hour. So Zorontian is no different from the same theme, and Zorontian is about the same thing, the disillusionment of an old man actually, who is talking about his society, his contemporary era where he is living, and his dissatisfaction with the modern world. So about the poem was first published in 1920. 2 years after it was published, Eliot considered including the poem as a preface to The Wasteland. Because you see, Wasteland is also one of the poems which talks about the disillusionment of the modern man. So this poem he thought would serve as the preface to The Wasteland. But he was talked out of this by Ezra Pound. And it can be read along with the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock and The Wasteland, as all the poems reflect the same theme. In Wasteland, Tiresias is the narrator, and you see what is the resemblance between the Wasteland and this poetry Zorontian. Because in Wasteland, Tiresias is the narrator, who is an old man, who is a prophet, who is blinded, but he has lived the life of both a man and a woman. And when we closely analyze both the poems, we see that the old man in Zorontian can be compared to Tiresias. He is the replica of Tiresias, as we can say. Tiresias is another mythical creature, an old man, a blind prophet who had lived in the life of both a man and a woman and had eyes of wisdom. So Tiresias is a prophet, a man of wisdom, and he, from his eyes of wisdom, looks towards this degenerating modern society, and then he comments upon it. The same thing is in Zorontian. The narrator is the old man who comments upon the modern society and its disillusionment. Now, the structure of the poetry. The poem is divided into 8 stanzas of unequal length. There is no specific rhyme scheme or metrical pattern. The poem is thus written in free verse. Zorontian is composed in the form of a dramatic monologue and comes from the perspective of an old man. Zorontian is a Greek word which means old man. So obviously the man who is talking, Zorontian, the title of the poem, is about the old man who is also the speaker of the poetry. What is dramatic monologue? Dramatic monologue is a form of poetry in which the speaker talks to himself or an imagined listener who is present there in a passive form. It is generally a self-brooding or self-conversation in the form of a speech or narrative in which the speaker is generally found describing a particular situation or series of events. So the same thing is happening here. It is a dramatic monologue. The old man is talking to himself or some passive listener, we don't know, because there is a reference to a boy, but that boy never speaks. And the whole poetry is in the form of a conversation, a self-brooding by the old man. That's why this is a dramatic monologue. In detail, if you want to know what is a dramatic monologue, I have attached a video of dramatic monologue, what is dramatic monologue, in the description box. You can go there and find out. Now, the theme and relevance. The poem is a dramatic monologue relating the opinions and impressions of an elderly man which describes Europe after the World War I through the eyes of a man who has lived the majority of his life in the 19th century. So he has seen the age before and now he is seeing the 20th century and he knows the difference between the two eras. Old man talks about his household. There is a boy who reads to him, a woman who tends the kitchen, and a Jewish landlord. He mentions 4 others, 3 with European names and 1 Japanese, who seem to inhabit the same boarding house where this man lives. But then, when you further read the poetry, you also can interpret it that all these are nothing but hallucinations of the old man. They are not real characters. It is just from his mind that he makes up these characters. And that also symbolizes this global world where the people or the things around the globe have come so close together that locally we are talking about global things. And obviously that's why global characters. The poem then moves to a more abstract me about the old man and his disillusionment with the modern world. The poem begins with an epigraph. The epigraph has been taken from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, which reads thus, quoting, "Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after dinner sleep, dreaming of both." So these lines are quoted from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, and it talks about the dilemma of an old man who is not left with age nor with youth, who is coming to or reaching towards the verge of his death, who has got no vigor, no energy left now. And not only about Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, but the whole poetry is laden with quotations from literatures of the past and the present. And all of the quotations or all of the inputs which Eliot takes from the various literatures are woven into the central emotive and tonal structure. In 1917, Eliot had written about the necessity for tradition in his famous essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. According to this essay, no poet is an island. He is, whether he likes it or not, a link in a chain of writers passing from the remote past through him and on to the future. And obviously that is what is tradition. We pass on our culture, our heritage, or in the field of literature what the ancients have written, their models and their works as linking chain which is followed. Whether the poet likes it or does not like it, it is a chain, it is a link of writers passing from the remote past through him onto the future. There is simply no such thing as a totally original, independent talent. The new writer is not only the product of the tradition, he is part of it, and he does may well alter it. Obviously, when there are any new wings of poetry or new genres of poetry coming up, differing from the classics or differing from the just previous wing, so obviously they alter it, they alter the product of the tradition. So new poets mean new and fresh assessments of the old hierarchy. And in Zerontion, T.S. Eliot puts his theory into practice by weaving quotations and references so closely in his own text that it is difficult to say whether one ends and where the other one begins. And his all of the theories can be well evident in this poetry, not only the theory of tradition and individual talent. Yes, we talked about tradition and also of individual talent. Why? Because when Zerontion is talking about the age and talking about the modern man and the decaying age, it very well also points out the fact that Eliot is very objective in giving all those narrations, and nowhere the personality of Eliot is revealed. It is the old man, the Zerontion, who is talking. And although the Zerontion is the mouthpiece of Eliot, but Eliot's personality is never manifested out throughout the poetry. So he is very objective and he is very traditional. So both of the veins are being followed here in this poem. And now we move on to the full poetry. So first the lines, the quotation from Measure, which reads thus: "Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after dinner sleep, dreaming of both." So the old man Zerontion is talking about himself. He has nothing left, nor youth nor age. So obviously he is an old man. He is towards the verge of his death, and that's why there is nothing which can be called as freshness or youth or vigor which is left in him. And he continues saying that, "Here I am an old man in a dry month, being read to by a boy waiting for rain. I was neither at the hot gates, nor fought in the warm rain, nor knee deep in the salt marsh, heaving a cutlass, bitten by flies, fought." So here you see that Eliot is saying that he is an old man in a dry month. The month is dry. Why? Because he's talking about this whole generation which has become dry, which has become barren, which has become a wasteland. There is nothing which is creative, there is nothing which is fresh or springing out of or is in a bloom. Nothing is growing actually. So we are all decaying, we are all in a dry month where creativity has died. And he's an old man and he is read by a boy reads out to him. Obviously he is now not that vigorous that he can read all his books on himself, so a boy is there to help him out. And then he says that he is waiting for rain. Obviously he is already told that it is a dry month. So in a dry month, any person will wait for rain. And this also signifies that when rain will come, when water will come, the plants, the trees, the surroundings will bloom. So they are waiting for some kind of kick which could make the things grow, which could bring creativity back to this dying generation. And he says that he has not fought any wars, and we see that this poem was written after World War I. So obviously he wants to point out the devastations a war brings, and he says that he was neither at the hot gates. So what is hot gates? Hot gate is the place where Battle of Thermopylae was fought. So that was a battle which was fought approx 300 BC, and it is a very famous battle. If you would have seen the movie, the Hollywood movie 300, it talks about in detail about how the Turkish people had invaded and how people defended, the Romans defended. So that was about the it is a very historical and landmark battle which was fought, with the men showing all their bravery and courage. Only 300 warriors fought against the whole Turkish army. So it is a very memorable war which he mentions, the Hot Gates, the Battle of the Thermopyles, and he says that he was never in any war. Because now we come to the personal life of Eliot also, that Eliot wanted to become or to be associated to get a place in the navy, but he was rejected. So in World War I, he had no participation at all. And that's why he says that he has not fought at wars. He was not in the warm rain out there with the soldiers, knee deep in the salt, marshy areas. That is the general life of a soldier. They face all adverse conditions, whether it is marshy area or dry land, they have to walk through. So he was never in any such critical conditions. Heaving a cutlass, obviously if you are in a marshy area or if you are passing a jungle or a forest, you must have a kind of weapon in your hands, a sword you can say, which the soldiers would use to make their way through the forest or make their way through the marshy areas. So here also he is saying that he was never able to do any such thing, nor he was bitten by flies, nor he never fought. So these all are a general condition, the tortures or the adverse conditions which any soldier faces in the battlefield, but he never had the opportunity to have those. And then he comes back to his own house, that where now he is living is a decayed house. My house is a decayed house, and the Jew squats on the windowsill, the owner. Now he comes to the owner of the land, the rented land, which is very well evident because the owner he mentions is a Jew where he lives. The house has also become old, the house is also decaying. Now here you see again it signifies that Eliot is talking about the whole of the generation where we are decaying, the generation is decaying, we are on the verge of destruction, and what we miss is that we are just a tenant on this earth. No one is permanently going to reside on this earth. So Eliot talks about the Zorontian, and the Zorontian is a tenant in the decaying house, which signifies every human being who is a tenant in this world. And then he says that the owner is a Jew. Now here comes the derogatory remark by Eliot, because you see, why a Jew? It can be any XYZ, any person, but you see in the early poems of Eliot, somewhere or sometimes there are some instances where he criticizes Jewish people, and he was a staunch Christian. So this we see a kind of again a personal hint, although Eliot talks about objectivity, but he criticizes Jew. One another aspect may be that Jews were basically into money lending and into business. So it may also signify that in the World War I money was dominating, and that's why he says that the Jew is the owner of the house. And he squats on the windowsill, means his eyes are everywhere, he keeps on peeping every time what is happening, what the tenants are doing in the house. And then he moves on to explain more about this money man, the Jew, and he says that he was spawned in Estaminet of Antwerp. So Antwerp is a place, and he says that in Antwerp he was born in an estaminet. Estaminet means a kind of pub or an inn. And he was blistered in Brussels, another place he mentions, another country, Brussels, where he got some kind of wound, and then he was patched and peeled in London. That wound was then healed in London. So you say again, he points out about the globalization of the world, that we have become or the whole world has become or come so close that one is born in Antwerp and then catches a wound in Brussels and then is healed in London. So this is the chain. The whole globe has become so local. So nothing is now globally, everything everything has become local. You want anything from America or China or anywhere else, you have it at your doorstep. So nothing is so far reached as it was before. And that was the basic flaw, because of this globalization only, because that was the time when colonization started, and it had its negative effects. Colonization had its negative effects, and everyone wanted the globe on their plate. Everyone wanted the colonies, the money that they extracted from the colonies on their plate, and that's why there was the World War One. It was a reaction to all those things. So somewhere or the other, he is criticizing this globalization. And then he says that then he talks about the daily mundane life that he actually has to face every day, day and night. And he says that there is a goat, the goat coughs at night in the field overhead, and there are rocks, moss, stone crop, iron, murds. The woman keeps the kitchen, makes tea, sneezes at evening, poking the peevish gutter. I, an old man, a dull head among windy spaces. And he says that my life is just any mundane life, and there is a lady who tends the house, who pokes the gutter. So, all the grotesque images, and she sneezes and she makes tea and she prepares the kitchen, and there is all around mess. There are iron scraps thrown all around, and rocks and mosses. And in the field, a goat coughs at the night. A basic mundane situation that he describes. And basically this is the situation through which he describes whole of the contemporary world. Everyone is living or leading the same mundane life. And then we move on to the next stanza, okay, last line, where he says, a dull head among windy spaces. He says that I am an old man, and I am the only one who has got lot of time to brood on what is happening in this world, and my head is because dull, and I have nothing else to, it is all windy. There is nothing else which is there is no other thoughts which are preoccupying my mind. So the only thought which comes to my mind is actually blank. It is all windy, it is all blank. So only thought which comes to my mind is that what is happening of this world. And at this juncture, he is free to analyze and to assess and to ponder more and more upon the repercussions of the destroying age. And that's why he says that I am an old man, a dull head among windy spaces. And then we move on to the next stanza, where he talks about signs. Now sign is very important thing, because the whole language that we speak, the whole identity that we follow is based on sign. And here I am again reminded of Saussure or Chomsky, because when they talk about signifier and signified, they talk about the meaning of sign, because a sign is made up of two things. One is the signifier and the other is the signified. Means if you have to say that a cat is a cat, how do you realize that it is a cat? Because we have just named it. CAT, cat means the four-legged animal which has got fur all around and which mews, and so we call it a cat. So the signifier is the word cat, cat, and the signified is the living creature cat himself or herself, which is signified by the name of cat, cat. So sign becomes so important. A cat is called a cat and not a comb or not a dog. So that is the whole meaning in it. The sign has got all the whole meaning hidden in it. That is the most important thing. Each word of any language becomes so important, because it signifies a whole world in itself. And then he says that signs are taken for wonders. Obviously any sign, any hint, and here he is talking about the hint, the sign of coming back of Jesus. So he says that signs are taken for wonders. We would see a sign, the word within a word. Again, he is talking about the free play of words, and it is far ahead of his times. He is talking about the intertextual readings, and he's talking about whatever Derrida talks about in deconstruction, that you have to read between the text and there is no fixed meaning to anything, and the text is a text of another text, or sign is a sign of another sign. There is nothing which is fixed. Any word can have, or any sentence can have multiple meanings, and it is based on the response of the reader. So again we are reminded of Richards also, and because Richards and Eliot followed the same path, moreover, because they both were talking about the reader response theory. Actually Richard propagated it, but Eliot was also in the same vein. So we can say that here that theory is only propounded when he says that a word within a word, any meaning, any sentence can have several multiple meanings, and it is all dependent on the reader how they represent it. Unable to speak a word, swaddled with darkness, in the zewissance of the ear came Christ the tiger. Now we have to guess the signs, and this is the perfect sign. He has talked about World War I, he has talked about the pathos of the age, he has talked about the deconstruction of the age, the devastation of the age, and now he is saying that all these signs, we have to put these signs together and we have to deduce this fact that Jesus is going to come, because the crime or the negativity of the age has rose up to such an extent that it is now necessary, it is the necessity of the hour for Jesus to be born. But Jesus is not going to be born in the form of a kind of angelic person as he was before. Earlier it was the lamb which signified Jesus, but now Jesus has become the tiger. So see how meaning changes. Earlier the sign was of a lamb for Jesus, and now the sign of a tiger for Jesus. Why? Because the destruction, the devastation of this age has reached to such a peak that only one thing is left: the total destruction of this world, the doomsday, which is well evident, and Jesus would come in the form of a tiger to devour everything, and to, because nothing can be now done of this world. From this all dead beings, no creativity can be born. So only one scope is left of the total destruction of this world and then creating a new world. So that's why he gives the image of Jesus as a tiger and not a angel. And then you see again we can see the same images of Jesus as a tiger when Yeats writes the second coming, and he talks about the Jesus coming in the form of a beast, and he is moving towards Bethlehem to be born, crouching and slouching in a beastic form. So all the writers of the age were talking about a destruction that was due, the world's doom that was due, and Christ coming as the tiger signifies the same. And in depraved May, dogwood and chestnut flowering Judas. Now he says that it is a time when nothing is blooming. It is May, although the month is of May, but it is depraved. No flowers, no fruits, no trees, nothing is blooming, no creativity actually. So the be it dogwood or chestnut, all are not growing. What is growing? Only Judas is growing, flowering Judas. So who is Judas? We all know that in the Last Supper, Jesus was revealed by Judas. Judas, who resembled Jesus a lot, and who, when the people came to arrest Jesus, they were all confused to whom they must arrest, and Judas pointed towards Jesus, revealing the fact that who Jesus actually is. And he was the deceiver, we can say, or he was the person who was blamed for the crucifixion of Jesus. So we must understand that Judas here is the culprit, and now it is the time of deceivers, when everywhere only several other Judases are springing up. and they are to be eaten, to be divided, to be drunk among whispers. By Mr. Silvero, with caressing hands at limousines, who worked all night in the next room. By Hakagawa, bowing among the Titians. By Madame de Tonquist in the dark room, shifting the candles. Fräulein von Kulp, who turned in the hall, one hand on the door, vacant shutters weave the wind. Now he takes up several names of Mr. Silvero, who is caressing his hands at the limousines and who was working all night in his next room. Then he takes the name of Hakagawa, who was bowing among the Titians. Titians is a famous painting of those times. And then he talks about Madame de Tonquist in the dark room, shifting the candles, and then Fräulein von Kulp, who was turned in the wall. So he talks about several names. He takes all these several names. Some are moreover like Japanese or Chinese name, whereas other are European and American names. So again he signifies that everyone, all different people are coming together. It is a global world. And then you see he also mentions that they are all in the next room, and he goes on to turn the uh, knob of the door and open the door and to look towards them. And when he has one hand on the door and he opens the door, he sees that it is all vacant. Nothing is there. All these are just imaginations of various different people coming into his mind. And then he says that I have no ghosts. Obviously they are not ghosts. There are not ghosts living in next to his room, and when he opens they are all gone. These are human beings which are created in his mind, through his imagination. And because he's an old man in a draughty house, again he talks about the decaying house where he lives, and he is living under a windy knob, a place which is preoccupied by wind, which is preoccupied by dullness, which is preoccupied by actually it is so very much vacant that it has got all the space to make so many people enter in his mind also and in his house also. So all are imaginations out of his head, which signifies the globalization of this world. You can imagine anything in a fraction of a moment, cause you are seeing all those people around, you are hearing of all those people around. Although you might have not ever visited China, America or Europe, but you can feel sitting at your own home that all these places are nowhere far away from you, they are somewhere just near your house. So this is the situation of this world which Eliot tries to describe, and obviously it is a very obscure poetry. It is not very comprehensible in step by step. You cannot understand it. You have to unravel the meanings, and it is totally based on reader response theory. How you read the text, how you find the meanings hidden between the lines, what he has already told, that a word within the word, you have to find out the meanings from all these words, and the more you read, the more you will unravel. So in a gist, I would like to hurriedly sum up whatever Eliot says in this poem. After such knowledge, what forgiveness? Think now, history has many cunning passages, contrived corridors, and issues deceived with whispering ambitions, guides us by vanities. Think now, she gives when our attention is distracted. Now he's talking about the history, how history is created. History is of the powerful. Those who are in power dominate. So he says that history is about cunning passages, about contrived corridors where some kind of game planning, some kind of plotting was going on, and the people who deceived more won more. The people who were more powerful won more. They came into power. So all such knowledge has got no forgiveness. Although you know that the world is on the verge of destruction, you have or you cannot save it, because the history is of the powerful, and we all are just guided by our ambitions or by our vanities, a sheer interest or sheer thinking that we are above all. So just after all this history, he shifts his uh, he shifts his idea from the idea of history to the idea of sensuality, and now he talks about the affections of a lady, and he says that when she gives you your attention, when you give her your attention, it is distracted, and when she gives with such supple confusions that the giving famishes the craving. So he says that when you are going to ask for love, you never get it back in the same time. She will take time, and in the meanwhile she is ready to reciprocate your love. Till that time maybe you are not interested. So you see, it is all created of so many confusions. When she gives you, you are famishing, that the giving famishes the craving. The craving is now gone, and now even when she gives, you are still hungry, because you are not satisfied. You could have been satisfied when you really needed it, but now you don't need it at all. So you see, again here it talks about this world where people have become so selfish that they will only come to you when they need you. When you need them, they may or they might not reciprocate, and when they come to reciprocate back, maybe you are in no mood to have that conversation or to have that help, or you just don't need that anymore. So she gives too late what's not believed in or is still believed in memory only, reconsidered passion, gives too soon into weak hands what's thought can be dispensed with till the refusal propagates a fear. And then he says that she gives but in a reconsidered passion. Love is based on passion. If you love someone, you love with total die-hardness, and then when you think and then you contemplate and then you reciprocate back the passion, it is half gone. The passion, the vigor is gone. So he says that when she gives with a reconsidered passion. She does not believe, she does not actually is confident about what she is going to do, and she gives too soon into weak hands. And sometimes when she gives to such people who really don't deserve it. And then such kind of things which happens in the game of love, it propagates a fear in the mind of the lovers. Think neither fear nor courage saves us. Now again he says that neither fear nor courage is going to save you. Both are dangerous. Unnatural vices are fathered by our heroism. What we do if we are prone into hero worship, or if we are prone into making ourselves as heroes, what we do, we tend to create vices, we tend to create wrongdoings. So heroism creates vices. And again here you see he is pointing out towards nationalism, because generally our heroes are our soldiers, our warriors, the brave hearts who fought for the nation, or who fight for the nation. So nationalism, this is a kind of attack on nationalism actually, because you see, in nationalism we are so blindfolded that we actually forget the futility of war, and we believe that okay, the country who won is the better one and the country who lost was not deserving. And we tend to forget the fact that all the soldiers who are fighting from both the countries are actually victims of war. They are not warriors, or they are not brave hearts, or they are not heroes of war. They are victims of war. They were forced into that war which could have been evaded. They were forced into that war which political leaders made happen, and which was for the gain of the political leaders, which was of no benefit for the soldiers at all, or for their families at all, or for the country at all. because no one is going to be benefited, no common man is going to be benefited by war. Only and only the people who are in power, the position holders, are going to be benefited. So he starts with the stanza with the fact that history is cunning and history has got contrived passages or contrived corridors, and then he moves on to this note that unnatural vices are fathered by our heroism. We tend to make national heroes, and in their shadow we tend to forget the fact that the war which was fought and the heroes that which are made of that war are of no use for common men. Virtues are forced upon us by our impudent crimes. So you give the, or you bestow a warrior from the war with lots of medals and lots of tokens of heroism, and actually you made them go into several kind of crimes, because killing someone maybe at a battlefield also is a crime. You're killing someone, you're killing the enemy in front of you, and then you tend to cover it up by making the warriors as virtuous, as heroes. And we all as people are brainwashed. Even the army men, even the people who are fighting at the battlefield, who have put their lives on stake, are blindfolded. They are not able to understand, or they are infused with such ideologies that they fail to understand that this is not for their benefit, not at all for their benefit. So we tend to forget the fact that we are committing some kind of crime through these words, and feed all those crimes, or actually replace it with considering them as virtues. The country which won was virtuous and it was the hero, and the people who fought for that country were also heroes. So that is a kind of false attitude which is, or false ideology which is created in the mind of the people. So these trees are shaken from the wrath bearing tree. So tears are coming to the eyes. Wrath is going to happen. Something undue is going to happen. If such is the condition of the world, someday or the other, something undesirable is obviously going to happen. The tiger springs in the new year. Again, the image of Christ coming as a tiger. So it is the new year. The new year signifies something new and starting of a new era. So here he says that the new year will come only when the tiger comes in, when the tiger pounces in. So after the destruction of this era, the new era is going to come, and he will devour us all. Us he devours. Think at last, we have not reached conclusion. When I stiffen in a rented house, think at last, I have not made this show purposelessly, and it is not by any concitations of the backward devils. So he's saying that I am not any man who is trying to raise demons. I am not a person who is very prolificent in witchcraft. So I am not rising up demons here, but I am telling you to think twice. I am telling you to try to understand where the world is heading towards. And all this show, all this what I have written was not purposelessly. It was done for a purpose. It had some purpose in mind which the readers must understand, and the purpose is obviously very clear: to lead forward the world into such a place where there is peace and no war, where there is creativity and no barrenness, where there is Jesus in the form of lamb and not tiger, and where there is Jesus and not Judas. So this is all what he points out. And then he moves on to the next stanza. I would meet you upon this honestly. So he's opening up his heart, is speaking out very clearly, honestly, what he wants to convey to the readers. I that was near your heart was removed therefrom to lose beauty in terror. terror, inquisition. I have lost my passion. Why should I need to keep it? Since what is kept must be adulterated. Nothing is now original in this world. And he says that now his heart is gone, his heart was removed that was near you. So people were earlier having warmth in their relationships, they were close to one another. Now the hearts are drifting away. Now the love is not pure. Earlier also he's pointed about love, that love comes with reconsidered passions. So we reconsider, we weigh the pros and cons, whether this match is going to be better for me or not. If I consider all good, all checkpoints clear, then only I proceed on with that relationship. So he says that people are not original in their form, their hearts are removed, and beauty is lost. Terror has been replaced by beauty, and then terror has also been now replaced by inquisition. People are indifferent towards one another. People have lost their passion, lost their spirit of guidance, and everything has been adulterated. Nothing is original. I have lost my sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. So now he is a Zarantian, he is an old man talking. So obviously he talks about his degeneration also, and his aging or his degeneration or his losing of senses also signify about the whole world. How should I use it for your closer contact? Because all the sense organs are not working now properly, so there could be no contact. The basic contact between two persons is maybe eye contact, or through smell, or through speech, when you will say something and I will answer something, but now, or through touch. But now he's saying that all those sense organs are not working properly, and this is not just for the Zarantian or the old man, but this is for the whole age. People have lost their senses, in one word. These, with 1,000 small deliberations, protract the profit of their chilled delirium, excite the membrane when the sense has cooled. Sense has gone. There is no sense, everything is nonsense. Senses are not working properly, senses have cooled. And what is working now? Chilled delirium. A kind of drug, a kind of substance abuse. People are profiting by exciting their membrane. Means too much of drug consumption, too much of drug addiction is taking place. So this is all also the drawback of this modern world. So people have lost their senses, the senses have been cooled, and it has been replaced by, already has told about adulteration. So the senses, already people had passion in earlier times, and they had senses, and senses were more over or more than enough to excite them, excite the people. But now what is happening? The senses are gone, senses have been cooled, and it has been replaced by an adulterated form, that is the drugs, that is the substance abuse, that is delirium, through which people make themselves excited. So everything is now adulterated. The total you say dejection of this world that he's talking about. In a wilderness of mirrors, there are pungent sauces, multiply variety, and it is not one or two, it is in multiplications. Everywhere there is a mirror, and the old man, if he is an old man and there are multiple of mirrors in front of him, the whole world is the same. The multiple images of the old man can be seen all around. So what will the spider do? Suspend its operation? Will the whale delay? Again, now the spider is spinning his web. You see how a web is. It is so prolonged that it stretches, and it can be spun all around the house. So the present world is like the web of the spider. You are caught in it and you have no way out. What will the spider do? Is it going to cut out its web? It is going to not spin anymore? No, it will keep on spinning more and more webs, and we are caught in that trap. We are caught in the web of the spider. And then again he mentions many names: De Balichet, Fresca, Mrs. Camel, world beyond the circuit of the shuddering beer. What are we? We are intoxicated through drugs or through beer, shuddering in the beer, in fractured atoms, gull against the wind in the windy streets. Again, he's talking about wind and wind and wind. So, because if it is a wasteland, if it is a place where there is nothing to hold on the ground, the wind will keep on blowing. There is no obstruction to stop the wind. The same is situation of this world. So the world is becoming a wasteland more and more, and the winds are moving freely. And he talks about the straits. The strait is obviously a water body. So he talks about the gull against the wind, and in the windy straits what is happening. He mentions the island of Belle Isle, or running on the horn, white feathered in the snow, the gulf claims. Again he talks about the island, the Belle Isle, and he says that white feathered with snow, this island, the gulf, is claiming that an old man is driven by the trades to a sleepy corner. The whole world is money centered, the whole world is materialistic, they are driven by trades. Earlier also he has used the analogy of a Jew, which Jew signifies money lending or Jew signifies business. And again here he is talking about traders. The world is dominated by money and traders and materialistic gains. So what is happening? An old man is moved aside to a corner. He is just a tenant of the house, and he is having several thoughts in his mind because he has too much time, free time, to think upon, to brood upon. So he is thinking, and there are several thoughts coming into his mind, thoughts of a dry brain in a dry season. Because this is the dry season, this is the season where there is no creativity, this is the age when there is no creativity. So obviously there are pessimistic thoughts coming to the mind because creativity is dead. So obviously the thoughts of the dry season will be dry. The thoughts of the dead world, of the decaying world, will be pessimistic thoughts. So that is all about this poetry. Let's move to the critical appreciation. Already we have talked about the poetry, but a brief description. So the poem begins with a quote from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure and tells us about the narrator of the poem, who is an old man and has thus lost his youth and age. As his days are numbered, the only thing he can do is to dream of them. Here readers must understand that the old man mentioned is not just the narrator who has reached his age, but it is the symbolic representation of the declining morals of the age and modernity and its negative aftermath. Disillusioned with the age of world wars, Eliot implies the decaying era. He also refers to the drought or the drying up of the writing culture. The first stanza extends this symbol, where Eliot refers to himself as an old man in a dry month. Here again, the dry month implies the decaying and crumbling era. The same can be compared with his opening lines of The Wasteland, where in The Wasteland he says, April is the cruelest month, burning lilacs out of the dead. It is a dry age, and then they are waiting for rain. They are waiting for creativity. The Zorontian, the narrator of the poem, is an old man who is the representative of his age. Zorontian. Then he mentions a boy, his decaying old house, his landlord who is a Jew, and the old lady who takes care of the house. He mentions the war that was fought in detail. Obviously, he is mentioning the World War. He confirms the fact that he was not participant in the war. Then he mentions several different places which prove that the world is getting closer globally, but also there is a well evident satire that human greed and colonizing attitude have also increased, leading to such war. Xenontion mentions that he has never fought at hot gates, thus going back to history, which is the Greek battle fought approx 380 BC, referring to the Battle of Thermopylae, if you remember the Hollywood movie 300. He has never fought any such battle, he mentions. So, to make it clear that no deeds of valor were booked in his name, adding to the fact that he was neither brought a sword or any such weapon to use when he says heaving a cutlass. Not to forget the fact that Iliad was denied entry in US Navy on physical grounds. Then he details upon his landlord, the Jew, which is a comment rather biased, who he says is a globetrotter who was born in Antwerp, got ill in Brussels, and was cured in London. All these are the hubs of trade and money. It also can be the reason that the Jews are generally very commercial people involved in business. He also refers to his mind as a dull and windy space where there is more of space and wind than grey matter. In the second stanza, the sign of God's coming is referred to, which also points out the fact that the end of the world is nearing, as God is now not portrayed as merciful but full of wrath like a tiger. Here we must not forget the second coming of Yeats and his reference to Jesus as a beast to be born, crouching and slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. Also, such references are found in Blake's poems. We must also not miss out the fact that there is some hint towards the intertextuality, as Eliot refers to a word being incorporated within another word. The signs of coming of Jesus is well evident, but people tend to not accept it prima facie, as we are so immersed in darkness that there is no perceiving of light. Only aspect left for the world to become a better place is total destruction. And hence, in the early years of the second coming of Jesus, he is tiger like ferocious. The third stanza, just after the reference of Jesus, mentions Judas, the betrayer of Jesus during the Last Supper. Now the season is moving from April towards May, and we see that here still the month is depraved of rain. Then he mentions some names from different parts of the world. Mr. Silvero, Hakagawa, Madame de Tornquist, Fräulein von Kulp are brought into the forefront. They all come together in his mind, and Eliot asserts that they are not only ghosts in their house, but maybe he is hallucinating. It asserts the fact that these names are a referral to the globe shrunk in the small place or space of a room. He also points out the fact that he was not involved in the war, so any such person is not to be haunting him, as he has never killed anyone in the war front. The fourth stanza again continues with the same implication that history is bitter, full of conspiracy and treachery. He adds on the fact that guided and motivated by vanity and vain ambition, such wars have been fought and designed. Then he goes on to mention the lady, his love interest, who never satiates the thirst of hunger of desire, and what she gives with such supple confusions that the giving famishes the craving. She is another symbol of the futility of desire and passion. There is always a fear for refusal and denial by the lady. Be it power or love, the two driving factors for people are very hollow and sham. Neither fear or refusal nor courage at war can save us. Unnatural vices are fathered by our heroism. Virtues are forced upon us by impudent crimes. These tears are shaken from the wrath bearing tree. In the fifth stanza, the symbol of Jesus as a tiger devouring everyone at the new year is brought forward. Eliot points out the fact that Xenontion is still trapped in the rented, decaying house. Rented house can also be seen as a metaphor for non-permanent stay in this world. At last, all has to leave this world, get old and die. Xenontion is nearing this phase, and it is not because he has evoked some devils, but it is true for the greater part of the generation which is decaying because of its contemporary situation. Sixth stanza talks about Jesus and his love for people and humanity, which people have cast aside. People have betrayed Jesus like Judas did. They have pulled away the beauty and nearness of Jesus from their heart to lose beauty in terror in inquisition. I have lost my passion. Why should I need to keep it? Since what is kept must be adulterated. As far as Zerontion is considered, he has now become an old man, all sense organs have failed him, and thus he is in no power to change, guide, or hinder the growth of the decaying world. The seventh stanza deals with the sensuous pleasures being sought by substance abuse, drugs, or alcohol. It pleases the senses but leaves us shuddering. Maybe some mental delirium is also referred to. People are falling prey to these spider webs spun by crafty moneymakers. Wheel. Whale is an insect spider like which is hinted. And again, some foreign names are mentioned here: D. Belhesh, Fresca, Mrs. Camel. The collage of all these pictures, these fractured atoms, add to the greater whole where the 20th century is at play. The final stanza talks about the Gulf and the Belle Isle, all straits and sea bodies run by trade. Zerontion plunges into the same, but now he is an old man and a tenant of the old house who is confined to his sleepy corner, and the whole poem is the outcome of his dry brain in the dry season. Hence, the reason of no positivity and pessimistic tone to the poem, as it elaborates on the civilization driven by lust and power and passion, full of war and bloodshed. Thus, the poetry that this age creates is also the same, with a pessimistic tone. So, that was all about this poetry. There are few quotes which I am bringing forward to you. One is from Wasteland, another one is from Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and both signify similar themes as we have read throughout this poetry. So, in the Wasteland, lines 115 and 16, he says, I think we are in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones. See what a grotesque image. A person trapped in a rat's alley, and there are bones all around, people have died all around. A kind of very grotesque image of this world is portrayed. And then from J. Alfred Prufrock, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon the table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights to a one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. So see, insidious, tedious, patient etherized upon the table, half-deserted streets, muttering retreats, restless night, such images are invoked in the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So that is what Eliot feels about the contemporary age. That is what Eliot feels about the modern man and his situation in this age. So similar theme is pointed out here in this poem that we read just now, and I'm sure you all have understood the poetry, although it is a tough poetry, but keep on reading line by line again and again, and there are many more meanings that you will unravel. So I could do what I did what I could do in this frame of time. Actually, the time has exceeded a lot because it is a very obscure poetry, so it took a lot of explanations from my part, but still I feel that there can be many meanings that you as a reader can unravel. So on that note, let's finish up with this video. Thank you.